One thing we know about human civilizations is they're inherently religious, even or maybe especially the ones that claim to be secular. Everybody worships something. So as the United States becomes progressively and now aggressively less Christian, that doesn't mean that religion has disappeared. Easter was replaced just the other day by the Biden administration with the worship of transsexualism, Transvisibility Day. So it's a religion, it's just different. And in this case, it happens to be a pagan religion. And that's the direction the United States is speeding right now, toward paganism. The question is, what does that mean? And does it make anybody happier? Very few people have thought about this in any systematic detail. John Daniel Davidson of the Federalist is one who has. In fact, he's written a new book on it called Pagan America, The Decline of Christianity and the Dark Age to Come. And we are happy to have him join us now. John, thanks very much for coming on. So Pagan America does a bunch of questions, but does the decline of Christianity, which is demonstrable and obvious and intentional, does that inevitably mean paganism?
In a word, yes. Because in the end, there is only one alternative to Christianity, and that is paganism. And we should be clear about our terms, right? When we say paganism, I don't mean that where there's going to be a sudden resurgence of the worship of Zeus or Odin, and an explosion of witchcraft, although that is happening as well.
Yes.
What I mean is a return of the pagan ethos. And the pagan ethos is and always has been a rejection of transcendent or objective truth, right? Pagans were free to divinize and assign divine status to the here and now, to things, to natural phenomena, even to people. And we are returning to that as the world becomes re-enchanted from its sort of secular hiatus that we've been on for the past century or so. And what that means in America, of course, is a radical moral subjectivity that we see in the trans movement, that we see in Black Lives Matter and critical race theory, that we see all across our society asserting itself now, that rejects what are fundamentally Christian claims about the human person, our relationship to one another, and our relationship to God.
So it seems like one of the ways, maybe the main way, that Christianity is different from all other religions in a practical sense is that it rejects human sacrifice being a constant throughout all recorded history. In every non-Christian culture, human sacrifice is at the center. So as Christianity recedes, should it surprise us that abortion, euthanasia, killing, war, human sacrifice has come to the center of our culture?
Not at all. In fact, I deal with this at length, specifically with abortion and euthanasia as the most obvious manifestations of the return of human sacrifice in the new pagan cults. And it's interesting when you look at the justification for something like abortion, back after Roe v. Wade and even into the 1980s, the justification was, this isn't a human being, this is just a clump of cells, you're not taking a human life, and these fetuses aren't viable. And as medical technology progressed in the 80s and 90s and over the past 25 years, you see the justification change. Advances in medical technology made the original justification make no sense. It could not be maintained that this was just a clump of cells. We all knew, and we all know undoubtedly now, beyond any doubt, objectively, an unborn human being is a human being.
Right.
And so the justification has changed from it's a clump of cells to safe, legal, and rare to shout your abortion. And so now you have a positive defense of abortion as a good, in fact, as a moral good that we should brag about and we should champion. And that is not a Christian value. That is a pagan value. And it's reasserting itself now in a modern context.
Well, I have noticed this. I haven't thought it through to the impressive degree that you have, but I noticed that the justification for abortion went from essentially rational, right? So if the fetus is not a human being, then that's no different from an appendectomy. And I don't agree with that, but that is a rational defense of abortion. It's not a big deal because the question of taking life doesn't enter into it. But once you give that up, then what is the justification? Is there a justification, publicly declared justification for taking another human life?
Well, there is now, and it's very pagan indeed. The justification now is that it is the will of the mother that determines the humanity of the child. So we have abortion laws in this country where a child of the same gestation, two children of the same gestational age in two different states, one has to be saved if born prematurely. All the medical technology, all the medical expertise that can be brought to bear to save that child's life must be brought to bear. Same gestational age child born in another state can be killed with impunity. The only thing that determines the humanity of this person is the desire of the mother to have the child or not have the child. And that is also quintessentially pagan, because in a pagan society, what determines right, what is morally correct, is based on a power dynamic. Those who have power do what they want to those who have no power, and that is their right. That is their God-given right to enslave or kill or rape or abuse anyone who they have power over. And that's the dynamic we see returning now. It may start with a rational or secular justification, as we saw with abortion, but as we're seeing now in places like Canada with euthanasia, it quickly moves into a power dynamic where people who are inconvenient are simply being killed, and there's very little justification on a Christian moral basis for it. Instead, there's a pagan moral justification, which is all about power and force and will.
And there's a delight there. I mean, you watch the Treasury Secretary, Janet Yellen, who I consider a criminal based on crimes that she has committed and never been punished for. But whatever you think of Janet Yellen, her job has nothing to do with abortion. She's the Treasury Secretary, and she comes out sort of it's almost like this non sequitur. It's like, why are you talking about abortion? And tells us that it's just a good thing. It's just a good thing. And if you want to help this country, you'll have more abortions. And she's thrilled to do it. So I look at that and I'm like, there's a supernatural component here. There's got to be, because there's no rational justification for it.
Yeah, exactly. There's no rational justification to allow healthy young people who are suffering from depression or maybe substance abuse addiction to kill themselves, but to have physician-assisted suicide.
Right.
And yet that's what's happening in Canada right now. And they went down the slippery slope. It only took them a few years to go from only people with terminal illnesses to anyone who's depressed and lonely. And maybe also people who are costing the national health system a lot of money. Maybe those people too, we can get rid of them. And there's actually, some government studies in Canada have actually calculated how much the National Health Service will save by expanding their euthanasia program. This is really dark stuff, and we have to understand it for what it is. It's the replacing of Christian morality with pagan morality, and the transformation of a republic of self-governing citizens into what essentially is a slave empire, where those with power, the ruling class, rules over an underclass that is subject to that power. And that's a very different dynamic. It means a total transformation of American society. And I don't think that many people have really started to wrap their heads around the implications of that for all of us.
Well, in Canada, I mean, you have the state murdering its own native population, overwhelmingly the Christian population of Canada, people whose ancestors were Christian, churchgoers, and then replacing them with people who are not Christians from other countries. So it's hard not to see that as part of it. I mean, that's just a fact. I mean, I guess you could interpret it in a different way. But it's the Christian Canadians who are getting killed by the state. I think that's just true.
I mean, it was also, we saw with this this hoax about the mass graves at the Indigenous schools as well, that unleashed a flurry of violence against Catholic churches in Canada. Dozens of churches were burned down, vandalized, destroyed, and the Prime Minister encouraged it. He cheered it on. Yes. And it was the same thing with the Black Lives Matter protesters here in the summer of 2020. The regime did nothing. They encouraged it. They wanted it to happen. They were willing to countenance violence in the streets and the use of raw force to advance their agenda and cement their rule, and then unequally apply the force of the state against Christians, against pro-life protesters, against people who were in the vicinity of the Capitol on January 6th. This is a pattern that we're going to see repeated more and more often as we get away from this idea of traditional Christian morality. That is to say, individual rights, rule of law, consent of the governed. These aren't things that just exist in like a secular liberal utopia. They depend on an actual Christian society to sustain them. And when Christianity, declines or we enter into a post-Christian era, those things are going to go away.
Yeah.
Like they can't sustain themselves on their own. And I don't think that we appreciate just how much we rely on our Christian inheritance for like our specifically American way of life.
So I think that's really insightful what you just said, but it's also the opposite of what we were promised. So what we were promised, as always, was liberation from the strictures of this ancient religion that kept people from dancing and playing cards and having premarital sex and like any kind of fun at all, right? It was the footloose model. But what we got was not liberation. The country doesn't seem freer or liberated as compared to the America of 30 years ago. Hey, it's Tucker Carlson. The internet is crowded with interesting things that don't really matter. On TCN, we attempt to bring you interesting things that actually do matter, and a lot of them. Interviews, long form and short, videos, documentaries. You can find all of it on tuckercarlson.com, and we hope you will.